person like you does not deserve to be here.
Why is everyone ignoring him? He is my father.
Don't look down on others.
Consequences of looking down on others.
Why does this happen?
Charleston, South Carolina. June. Humid and hot as a breathing brick kiln. The smell of river rain mixed with the scent of new wood from the construction site across the street. The smell that for 30 years I have called the smell of my life. Elias Navarro, a man with a Mexican last name, in a city where Whitmores, Andersons, and Haywards have existed since the Civil War. I built their houses, renovated their mansions, stood on the sidelines of their parties, just to watch the yellow light fall on the stone I polished the day before. But tonight, I'm not a hired hand. Tonight, I'm the father of the bride. My small living room was lit by yellow lights and a bouquet of white flowers that my daughter Sophia had brought home to decorate for tomorrow's wedding. On the table was an embossed invitation. The Whitmore Navarro wedding, June 24th, 2024. I had looked at it a dozen times, still not believing that an immigrant's dream could go so far. Until Preston Whitmore III opened his mouth. We only want important people at our wedding. You understand, Uncle Elias? Don't invite working-class people. The air froze. The sound of the clock's hands lightly hitting the wooden wall sounded like knives cutting. Sophia looked up, eyes wide. Preston. She started to say something, but he gently gripped her shoulder, the faint smile still on his lips. Love, don't get me wrong. We just want a Whitmore wedding. Whitmore, a surname longer than the history of the house they live in. I put down my glass, keeping my cool, as I had done with workers arguing on the construction site. Son, I said slowly, perhaps we should understand better. What is an important person? He smiled, eyes full of pity. People of influence, sir. We have congressmen, bankers, and officials as guests. You invite construction workers, immigrant neighbors. They won't be comfortable. We need to maintain our image, right? I looked at Sophia. Her eyes wavered, as if she wanted to say, I'm sorry, but didn't dare. My child. The child who used to run barefoot around the construction site, now trembled with fear of offending a man in a suit from a past life. In that moment, I felt the house I had built with my sweat was tilting. Each brick of trust began to crack. I didn't get angry. I didn't need to. A man like me doesn't need to shout to show his power. I just smiled, the smile that let my workers know who was about to be fired. I see, I said softly. Tomorrow, the wedding will only have important people. Preston thought I agreed. He grinned, raised his glass. Great. I knew you would understand. You're a realist. And I just saw through the red wine in my glass, the reflection of myself 30 years ago, the young immigrant with the hammer, sweating on the wet tile, dreaming that his daughter would never be disrespected. When they left, Sophia turned back to hug me. Don't be mad at him, Dad. Preston didn't mean it. He's just used to the other world. I stroked her hair. I'm not mad. But honey, there are words that when they're spoken, they're not meant. They're essence. The door closed. The house was silent, except for the sound of cicadas outside the window and the picture of my wife, Lucia, hanging on the wall. I looked at her. The eyes in the frame seemed to ask, "Elias, will you be silent again?" I walked to my desk. My old laptop still had project files open. Next to it was a long list: restaurants, hotels, clubs, resorts. Navarro Builder's name was on almost all of them. I took the pen and drew a line under each name. With each line, my heart beat slowly, heavily, and evenly. Not with anger, but with awareness. Because I understood. Preston had not just insulted me. He had insulted 30 years of immigrant history that built this city. I poured more wine and looked out the window at the Ashley River, lit by lights. Fishing boats drifted silently on the water. I heard Lucia's voice in my head. "I don't need power. I just need justice." I replied softly, my voice hoarse. "Justice? Yes. Then I will rebuild it, from his own foundations." The next morning, I arrived at the construction site. The old workers who had stood beside me for decades greeted me with familiar eyes. Tony asked, "Boss, you look a little strange. Is something wrong?" I just smiled. "It's fine, very fine. We're about to take on an interesting project." They laughed. No one knew that the project was not part of a blueprint, but part of a lifelong plan to reclaim self-respect. There are words that seem like mere insults, but for someone who has been disrespected all his life, they are a summons to justice. And that night, when I closed my laptop, I knew Preston Whitmore's wedding would never go the way he wanted. Perhaps there is nothing more painful in a man's life than watching his own daughter's happiness gradually being erased of all traces of himself. And I, Elias Navarro, am witnessing it every day, in every chilling detail. 3 days after Preston said those 11 words, an email landed in my inbox. Wedding guest list, revised draft. I opened it. 12 familiar names. Gone. Tony Ramirez, the first worker I hired when I was working on a suburban construction site. Old man Lu Chen, the neighbor who babysat Sophia during the years I worked double shifts. And Martha Doyle, the only black woman in my neighborhood who helped Lucia when she gave birth to Sophia. All of them were marked with a red flag, removed non-formal associations. I read the note 10 times. The words non-formal associations stabbed me like a knife, deep into my chest. That night, I went to Sophia's house with the wedding invitation proofs. She opened the door, looking a little haggard but still smiling. "Dad, I was going to call you. I have some things to discuss about the invitation list." Her voice was shaking, and in that moment, I understood. She was trying to say something she knew would hurt me. Preston said, "Dad, the wedding needs to be a cohesive affair. He doesn't want everyone to feel out of place." Out of place? I mean, your friends, the old craftsmen, they might not be used to that kind of thing. And his guests, they're more important? She fell silent. I looked into Sophia's eyes. They had lit up when she got her diploma, when she showed off her first design. Now there was only fear of judgment. The next day, Preston emailed me thanking me for understanding. Attached was a table plan. I looked for my name. Table 17. Near the kitchen door, next to the wait staff area. I laughed. Not loudly, just a gasp, from the man who had built the grand hall for dozens of high-class weddings, now being pushed to sit next to the food door. If that was a symbol of social status, then I had just been taught the most expensive lesson of my life. A week later, I arrived at the Charleston Harbor Club construction site, where the wedding was to take place. The manager recognized me and warmly shook my hand. "I hear the Whitmore Navarros are hosting their reception here. We're proud to have worked with your company." I nodded, smiling faintly. Maybe they forgot who rebuilt their ballroom ceiling in 2016. He hesitated. "Rich people are forgetful, Mr. Navarro." That sentence, seemingly light, was like a hammer, hammering on the coffin of my faith. That evening, I returned home. The kitchen was quiet, except for the yellow light that illuminated the photo of Lucia hanging on the wall. She was smiling, a smile I once called the light at the end of a long day. I sat facing the photo frame and whispered, as if confessing, "You let them belittle what you built. You let your daughter believe that her worth was in the eyes of others." The cicadas in the yard started and then stopped. In the silence, I could hear each heartbeat clearly, like the sound of a hammer hitting the concrete in my chest. The next day, Sophia came to my workshop. She brought a sample of off-white fabric, the wedding color scheme. "Dad, Preston said I should choose this color. It looks more luxurious." I looked at the cement dust on my hands, then at the smooth fabric. Two worlds, one real, one fake. And my daughter was being pulled toward the fake. "Sophia," I said, my voice low, "do you remember what your mother said?" "About what, Dad?" "That there is no whiter than hands that have done real work." She pursed her lips. I saw tears in her eyes. "Dad, I just want everything to be perfect." I nodded. Perfect doesn't mean right. The following week, the official wedding invitations were printed. I held the final copy and looked at the tiny name, Elias Navarro, father of the bride, smeared among the list of sponsors, organizations, and fancy fonts. My name was there as a footnote, not the source of the story. I put the postcard down and went out onto the balcony, where the river breeze carried the smell of salt and rust. From here, I could see the buildings I had built, the hotel, the theater, the town hall. I had thought I belonged to this city. But that night, I realized the world I had built was erasing me from it. A sudden rainstorm fell on Charleston. The sound of raindrops hitting the tin roof echoed like 1,000 hammers. I looked up at the sky and let the drops mix with my eyes. It wasn't the rain that stung. It was the trust that was crumbling like old tiles. And it was then, in the midst of the rain, the darkness, and the thunder, that I suddenly heard Lucia's voice in my memory. "Elias, people can take away your reputation, but they will never take away your self-respect unless you give it to them." I nodded slightly. "I understand, Lucia. I understand." The next morning, I turned on my computer and scrolled through my contacts. Hundreds of names, hotel owners, construction managers, city councilors. 30 years in the business. I had no title, but I had connections. And in my head, a plan began to form. Slowly, precisely, just like when I was laying the first bricks of my life. Some say money defines status. Others say class is where you sit at a wedding banquet. But I ask you a question. When you are erased from the world you built, what will you choose? A. Bow your head and accept it. B. Stand up and reclaim your place. Quietly rebuild a new world where those who once looked down on you pay the price. After that rainy night, I stopped being silent. They can erase my name from the table, but they can't erase my memory. And I remember every person I helped build Charleston. A week before the wedding, the phone rang. Preston Whitmore III appeared on the screen. His voice still carried that confident tone, the tone of someone born into money. "Uncle Elias, we need to talk about some delicate matters." I pressed the record button, an old habit of a former construction worker, because it's easy to forget what you said when the truth comes. "Listen, Preston. You know," he began, "this wedding is more than just a personal event. It's symbolic of two families." He spoke slowly, like a man explaining a map he expects others to follow. "We Whitmores have 4 generations of lawyers, financiers, and leaders. Everything has to be on point." "Point?" I asked, my lips twitching slightly. "Yes, the language of power, you know." "Be more specific." "For example," he continued, "you shouldn't be offended if some inappropriate people are invited. They're your friends, but not the kind of people upper society associates with." I fell silent, letting him continue. I had heard that kind of talk, smooth, half-flattering, half-contemptuous, for 30 years. Preston slipped into a lecture rhythm. "You know, Charleston has its own social system. People like us, old families, we don't show off our money, we show off our heritage. People respect the Whitmores because we keep standards. Not everyone can understand that language." "The language of power?" I repeated, stifling a laugh. "That's right. The language of people with roots, influence, refinement. Wealth isn't about having money, Uncle Elias. Wealth is about knowing how to make people obey without having to say anything." I leaned back, looking at the Ashley Rivers sparkle, and said, "And you think I don't understand that language?" "Not really," he replied, low, coaxing. "I know you're successful. Building, houses, buildings, admirable. But you understand, that's new money. Old money is different. Old money, refined over time." I laughed, not amused, but because he said refined as if morality were a wine. "Refined," I said, "like the steel in your house's foundation?" "I'm just saying each world has its own rules. You built your world. Now Sophia is entering mine." There was arrogance there, yes, but also possessiveness. Your world, not Sophia's, not ours, yours. I spoke so low he had to hold his breath for half a second. "You think I'm just a lucky builder, don't you?" "Uncle Elias, No, go ahead. To you, people like me just happen to stumble upon an opportunity, right? I don't mean good, because you're about to learn what real building is." At that moment, I hung up, not out of anger, because I had heard enough. The recording stops at 23 minutes. 23 minutes, just enough to lay bare a generation that believes itself born to be respected. I sat with my phone. The screen glowed. His breathing echoed in my head. The breathing of someone teaching subtlety, not knowing he was digging his own grave. I played the recording back, listening to every sentence, every small inflection. When I heard the language of power, I looked around my little house. Every brick, every beam, evidence that I already spoke that language. Only difference is, I don't use it to make people bow down. I use it to make lives stand up. Sophia called right away. "Dad, Preston said you two had a little misunderstanding? No, honey. There was no misunderstanding. He said I was angry about the guests. Angry? No, I just felt relieved. Because I finally knew who I was dealing with. What do you mean? She asked. I said softly, You will, Sophia. Soon. I hung up, saved the file to my hard drive, and set the password, Foundation. Foundation. Because that's where every crumbling structure starts. Time 400 pounds. That night I couldn't sleep. I opened the old construction book, the directory of every person who'd ever worked with Navarro Builders. Each name, a memory. Each memory, a pillar of this city. I understood then, when a man looks down on the unimportant, he forgets that it is those people who hold the keys to every door. 23 minutes, 11 words, and a calm smile. That's enough to start a storm. But I ask you, if you heard someone insulting your entire past, what would you do? A. Slam the table, react immediately. B. Keep quiet and observe. C. Smile and start planning to make him collapse. 23 minutes of recordings told me more about Preston Whitmore than he had in a year. I had thought he was just arrogant, but it turned out he was stupid enough to teach a builder how to demolish a house. I pulled out my phone and dialed the familiar number. Ray Ortiz. The voice on the other end was hoarse, mixed with the sound of a Zippo lighter being flicked. Ray, I need a deep dive. How deep? To the core. Ray chuckled. Low, slow. You sound like you were in the army. When are you going to bomb? Target? Preston Whitmore. Whitmore Holdings. The whole thing. Your future son-in-law? Not mine. Sophia's, Mo. For now. There was a pause. Then Ray said, Give me 48 hours. I looked at my watch. No, Ray, 24. The wedding is tomorrow. At 10:43 a.m., the first email from Ray arrived. Subject line, Whitmore Holdings, internal findings. Beneath it, the words sent a chill down my spine with satisfaction. The SEC opened a preliminary investigation 6 weeks ago. Suspected manipulation of private investment funds. 3 anonymous accounts, totaling $2.3 million, moved shadily through shell companies. Atlantic City Casino debit, $412,000. A direct transfer from the senior client's account to the personal account of Preston W. for short-term investment advance. Ray called, his voice calm but sharp as a knife. Elias, that guy is about to explode. The SEC is just waiting for more evidence. He thought marrying your girl would give him capital to cover his losses. Just like a rich kid who has run out of money. I closed my eyes and smiled, thin as a knife. Good. Then I don't need a gun. I just need a phone. It was midday. Charleston hot. I walked into my office, closed the door, and pulled out an old black book. What anyone would think was a construction ledger. But no, it was the city's debt book. For 30 years, I'd been recording every favor. Help with a broken elevator, fixing a roof, saving a failing contract. Each name in there was a veritable brick of power. I turned to Charleston Harbor Club. Manager, Samuel Rains. 5 years ago, his restaurant was nearly shut down for fire code violations. I called the chief inspector, asked for a 3-day extension. I dialed. Sam, it's Elias. Elias, I hear you're the father of the Whitmore's bride? Yeah. By the way, Sam, the bride just went to the hospital. My family wants to cancel. Sam's voice softened, sympathetic. Oh my God, I hope she's okay. Don't worry. I'll cancel and refund. Thank you. And keep it a secret. Of course, Mr. Navarro. A smile. A wobbly brick. One by one, I called Magnolia Hall, the Riverfront Pavilion, and St. James Hotel. At each place, I only had to say 2 words. The Whitmore family. The other side was silent for a second, then nodded. We understand. Why? Because in Charleston business circles, Navarro Builders doesn't just build houses, it builds reputations. A missed project can keep me up at night. A word I say can cost them the contract. And by the time the clock struck 4 p.m., every luxury location within a 50-mile radius had the same note in its book. Booking canceled. Emergency. Time boss St. Thomas. Ray called back, his voice both curious and admiring. What did you just do, Elias? I see the entire Charleston venue system is in chaos. I replied blandly. Just clearing the seats, Ray, so that the wedding has the right, important people. Important like who? Like you, like me, and like Justice. As night fell, I stepped out onto the porch. Charleston was bathed in the golden glow of old gas lamps. In the distance, the bells of St. Philip's Church rang out, evoking a strange sense of peace. But in my heart, it was no longer peace. It was the calm before the storm. I poured a glass of bourbon, raising it to the picture of Lucia on the wall. You see, Lucia? No bullets, no knives. Just a memory and a phone. That's enough to teach them respect. The next morning, the Charleston Morning Post carried a small story. Harbor Club, Magnolia Hall, and St. James cancel weddings on the same day. Rumor had it was technical reasons. Only I knew it was ethical reasons. In the afternoon, Sophia called, panicked. Dad, all 3 venues have canceled. Preston is crazy. He said he will sue them all. I kept my voice calm. Calm down, Sophia. Maybe God is testing you to see if you are marrying the right person. Dad, I don't understand. You will understand, daughter. When everything falls apart, only the real foundation will stand. That night, I heard the waves crashing against the shore like the silent applause of the city. No one knew that in just 24 hours, a builder had become the architect of collapse. And the best part? I didn't need to lift my hand to strike. I just hit the weakest brick. Justice sometimes doesn't come from the court. Times 300 psions. It comes from the hands of the most despised. If you were in Elias's position, knowing who trampled on your family's honor, which way would you choose to restore justice? A. Hit him in the face just to feel better. B. Stay silent and let him self-destruct. C. Plan to destroy his entire empire in 24 hours. End of narration. Every building that collapses leaves dust behind. And when the Whitmore Empire began to crumble, the dust of public opinion was the first to rise, thick and suffocating. Friday morning. I had just made coffee when my phone started ringing. Texts, calls, emails. Preston Whitmore III dominated the headlines. Whitmore family hit by smear campaign. Charleston aristocrats strike back. Wedding of the century turns into media tragedy. I turned on the internet. The screen was filled with videos he'd posted 2 hours earlier. Perfect lighting, perfect tone, like someone trained by a media consultant. Dear friends, family, and Charleston community, recently, individuals have used the name of justice to destroy the Whitmore family's reputation. We, those of us who believe in American values, in honest work and ethics, will not be silent in the face of envy and lies. He stopped, and looked straight into the camera. Some people, even with money, still don't understand that class can't be bought. In less than 30 minutes, the video had gone viral across Charleston. The upper class was sharing it. Yes, the nouveau riche need to know their limits. You can't just let everyone into the elite's banquet table. A storm of arrogance, covered in the hashtag True American Values. I sat in the workshop, listening to his every word on the radio, the sunlight shining on the dust on the table. Next to me, the USB drive containing 23 minutes of recordings lay still, like an unloaded bullet. I didn't need to shoot. I just needed to press post. I turned on my computer and wrote a single line. No flowery words, no hate. Just the truth. Clear, sharp, and undeniable. Before you talk about American values, look at the person who is stealing money from his grandparents to gamble. Below, I attached a screenshot, a $180,000 transfer from a senior client account to the personal account of Preston Whitmore. Note, investment transfer, Atlantic City, Post. 3 hours later, Charleston was no longer silent. The pro-Preston posts vanished, as if someone had flipped a switch. In their place, the faces of those he had deceived began to appear. Martha Doyle, 73, commented first. I am a customer of Whitmore Holdings. My pension money has been missing since last year. This is the same transaction. I reported it to the police. No one believed it. Then there's Robert Chen, the Chinese-American owner of a small grocery store. We also lost our grandson's entire college fund. Mr. Elias was right. He didn't just steal money. He stole trust. Each comment, a bullet. And the online community, a battlefield. By afternoon, the major newspapers changed tone. From wedding to financial scandal, FBI investigates Whitmore Holdings. Ray called, laughing hoarsely. Did you just drop the bomb, Elias? The FBI just moved the inspection from next week to tonight. I just replied softly. I just opened the door for justice to come in early. That night, Preston posted another video. He tried to act composed, but his eyes were twitching. This is intentional slander. I will sue. The Whitmores have the best lawyers in Charleston, and we will... The clip cuts off. The comments below filled with laughing through tears emojis. One person wrote, "The best lawyer in Charleston? Is this the photo?" The photo shows attorney Whitmore leaving his office, holding an FBI envelope. In less than 6 hours, the Whitmore family's media system collapsed. Those who had once called him a real aristocrat fell silent. Those who once looked down on Elias Navarro began sending apologies, wrapped in excuses, hidden behind misunderstandings. As for me, I didn't reply to anyone. I just posted one more line. Never teach a builder about foundations, unless you are sure your own house has no cracks. That night, Charleston was drenched in heavy rain. On King Street, the Whitmore Holdings sign was blown off and smashed to the curb. A reporter took a picture and wrote a caption. Old money out of business. I sat on the porch, bourbon in hand, listening to the distant thunder. Not the sound of a storm, the sound of justice, laughing. Some say public opinion is the most ruthless weapon, because it doesn't need bullets, just the truth. But if you were Elias, despised, trampled, and in your hands, held the truth that could destroy an empire, what would you do? Option 1. Give it to the media and let them expose it. Option 2. Release it yourself and let him fall on his own. Option 3. Stay silent, waiting for the day he's swallowed up by his own world. As social media quieted after the storm of public opinion, Charleston thought things had calmed down, but no one knew. The real storm had yet to begin. The next morning, mist on the Ashley River misted the water, and the wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine around my old cabin. The backyard had been set up as a stage, white chairs lined up neatly, silk streamers blowing in the wind. 150 guests had arrived, tuxedos shining, shoes polished, not knowing they were about to attend a wedding without a groom. I stood by the window, watching Sophia walk out in a white dress. No flowers in her hand, just a stack of papers, evidence, wounds, and a decision that would change her life. "Are you sure?" I asked. Sophia nodded, her voice unusually calm. "Dad is right. Justice is not something people give. It's something we have to stand up and take back." Lucia would have smiled if she were still alive. I gently took her hand, then stepped back, leaving Sophia to step into the light, alone. Music played. Not a romantic love song, but a sad Chopin piano piece, chosen by Sophia herself. Guests whispered, "Where's the bride? Is the groom stuck in traffic?" The front door opened. Preston Whitmore III walked in. His face pale, his tie crooked, his eyes dark from lack of sleep. When he saw Sophia, he gave a wry smile. "Honey, can we talk privately?" Sophia shook her head. "No, Preston. Everyone needs to hear today." The speaker turned on. A familiar voice rang out, clear, cold. "Your people wouldn't understand the language of real power. Remember, Uncle Elias, old money is not something everyone can touch." The crowd held its breath. Preston's own voice echoed through the garden. Each word fell like a stone, shattering the perfect mask he had worn for so long. His mother, Eleanor Whitmore, turned pale and stood up. "Who authorized this garbage?" I stepped forward, microphone in hand. "I authorized it, because this is my home, and this is where justice is made." I pointed to the screen where Preston's transfer to Atlantic City Casino appeared. "This is the language of power your son speaks of. The money of old people he calls not up to par. This is how he proves the Whitmores' American values." A click sounded, not from the speaker, but from the cold metal of the handcuffs. 2 FBI agents stepped out of the crowd, voices steady. "Preston Whitmore III, you are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement of client assets." The murmurs turned to gasps, then silence. He struggled, looking around for a savior. No one dared look back. The important people, congressmen, bankers, Charleston aristocrats, bowed their heads in silence. Only the unimportant ones, the builders, the neighbors, the immigrants, and the elderly victims, applauded. At first, just 1 or 2. Then the whole garden thundered. Eleanor Whitmore raised her hands to her ears and shouted, "Enough! This is an insult!" I looked at her calmly. "No, madam, this is a lesson. Because the truth even if buried under gold, will one day rise to the surface. The FBI led Preston past me. He looked at me, eyes bloodshot. "You ruined me," I replied softly, almost a whisper. "No, Preston. I just pressed play. And you recorded your own sentence." As the agent's car drove away, Sophia stood still. I walked over, placed my hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I don't know, Dad. I lost someone I loved, but I found myself again. So I haven't lost anything." That afternoon, the sunset dyed the river red. Sophia removed her veil, her hair blowing in the wind. No more bride, no more wedding. Just a girl freed from the shackles of illusion. As for me, I just stood there, watching the crowd disperse. Those who were not up to par were now the first to step forward, not out of curiosity, but out of pride. Because for the first time, justice was on their side. There are weddings that are born to bind two people, but there are also weddings that are born to free a whole life. If you were Sophia, knowing that the person you love is a liar on your wedding day, what would you choose? 1. Close your eyes and get married to save your family's face. 2. Stop and tell the truth in front of everyone. Or 3. Silently leave and let life punish him. After the handcuffs were placed on Preston Whitmore's wrists, Charleston was no longer the same Charleston. The city felt as if it had just witnessed a monument collapse in the middle of a beautiful flower garden, and suddenly remembered, gold can rust. For decades, the Whitmore name had been whispered with reverence, attached to charity galas, country club donations, and photographs in society pages. But that morning, when the news broke, the whispers turned to murmurs, then to silence. On the street corners, at the docks, in the diners that served shrimp and grits, everyone talked about the fall of a man who once believed he was untouchable. That afternoon, my backyard was still littered with fallen flowers from the unfinished ceremony. The white chairs were toppled by the storm that had passed, the tablecloths half soaked in champagne and tears. The scent of roses mixed with the smell of sawdust from the half-built archway where my daughter was supposed to say, "I do." Sophia stood there, still in her wedding dress, her shoulders shaking slightly in the wind. The dress, once a symbol of dreams, now looked heavy, as if it carried the weight of every promise that had turned to dust. Her makeup had run down her face, but her eyes had never been clearer. Tears rolled down her cheeks, no longer those of a broken bride, but those of a woman just waking up from the dream of fame. "I loved the wrong person," Sophia choked, "but I was not wrong to trust you." Her voice trembled, but not out of weakness. There was strength beneath the cracks, the kind of strength born from pain. I held my child, my calloused hand on his back. "You don't need to be rich to be respected, Sophia. You just need to be true, true to yourself and to what you build." The wind blew, blowing away the remaining veil, carrying it out into the middle of the Ashley River. I watched it drift away, like drifting away weakness, innocence, and illusions of class. The water caught the sunlight as the veil floated further, then slowly sank, like the last lie sinking beneath the surface. 3 months later, the Charleston Chronicle ran a headline: Preston Whitmore III, sentenced to 9 years in prison for financial fraud and embezzlement of senior citizens' funds. Below was a photo. Preston walking out of court, head bowed, hands cuffed. The sun was shining, but he still looked like he was walking in shadow. The man who once arrived in private jets and tailored suits now wore a plain beige jumpsuit, his arrogance stripped away, leaving behind nothing but a reflection of the greed that had built his empire. The Whitmore family sold off all of their assets. The 4-generation-old mansion was repossessed by the bank. The Whitmore name, once a symbol of Southern aristocracy, was now a stain on Charleston's history. Neighbors who used to send flowers to their parties now crossed the street to avoid being seen near them. The portrait that hung in the Charleston Museum, Preston Whitmore Sr., the philanthropist of the South, was quietly removed from display. Charleston, a city that wore its pride like perfume, finally confronted its own hypocrisy. In contrast, Navarro Builders, once considered a second-rate builder, was talked about everywhere. Not for building taller buildings, but for building stronger trust. The small office that once had peeling paint and second-hand furniture now had visitors daily. Students, clients, volunteers, people who wanted to work with honesty. Sophia, instead of hiding, chose to stand up. She came to work with me, not as the boss's daughter, but as director of the Navarro Builders Foundation, which helps seniors and workers who have been financially scammed. The first day she stepped into the workshop, she wore jeans and a white shirt. Her hair was tied back. There was no jewelry, no perfume, only determination. The workers, most of whom had seen her crying on TV that day at the courthouse, paused when she entered. Then, one by one, they nodded. Not in pity, but in respect. On opening day, Sophia said, "My father used to say, when they take away your reputation, rebuild it with action. Today, we don't build houses for others. We rebuild trust for those who have been betrayed." The audience fell silent. They no longer saw the naive girl chasing after the limelight. They saw the heiress of self-respect. Even the press, those who had once splashed her humiliation across front pages, wrote headlines like, "From Broken Bride to Builder of Hope." I looked at Sophia standing on the podium, the light reflecting off her face. In that moment, I no longer saw Lucia in the framed photo on the wall, because Lucia was living inside my daughter. And I knew my family had not lost anything. We had just been given back. The city grew quiet. People who once bowed to Whitmore now raised their heads when they saw me on the street. Not out of fear, but because they understood. True respect doesn't come from medals or family names. It comes from hands that know how to work and hearts that keep their word. Some evenings, after the day's work, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun melt into the river. The sound of hammers still echoed from the workshop, but to me it sounded like a hymn, the music of people building again, not for wealth, but for dignity. One afternoon, Sophia asked, "Dad, do you hate Preston?" I laughed. No. Without him, I wouldn't know what true value is. Sometimes God uses fake people to help us see the real thing. She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and said, "Then maybe that was his only good deed." That day, as the late afternoon sun streamed into the workshop, I saw Sophia standing among the wooden frames, her sleeves rolled up, smiling brightly amidst the paint dust. The smile of someone rebuilding her own life. The smell of varnish and cedar filled the air. Sawdust sparkled in the light, like tiny golden flecks. I looked around. Lucia's photo, the old table, the rusty nail, everything was still there. Only one thing had changed. We were no longer afraid of losing our place in someone else's world, because we had finally found our own place again. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear Sophia working in the office, typing letters, reviewing grant proposals. Once I peeked in and saw her staring at the screen, her eyes full of quiet determination. She wasn't chasing forgiveness anymore. She was earning peace. There are wounds that do not leave scars on the skin, but are carved into the dignity. But it is from there that people truly mature. Preston's downfall became more than a headline. It became a mirror for the city. People started to question what success really meant. Some of the Whitmore investors even came to our office, not to apologize, but to learn how to rebuild what they had lost. Integrity. Months later, the Whitmore mansion stood empty, its garden overgrown. Yet behind our humble office, a new community center rose from the ground, a place where children could learn trades, where elders could share wisdom, and where Sophia's name was carved not in marble, but in gratitude. On the day of its completion, she placed a single wooden plaque on the wall. It read, "Built with honesty, rebuilt with love." When the crowd applauded, I stood at the back, watching her. The wind caught her hair, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw Lucia's spirit standing beside her, proud, smiling, unafraid. And I realized something. Justice isn't always about seeing someone punished. Sometimes, it's about seeing someone rise again, cleaner, wiser, and finally free. If it were you, after being betrayed and losing everything you believed in, what would you choose? Lock yourself in bitterness? Forgive and start over? Or turn pain into motivation to live better than the one who hurt you? Charleston was quieter after the media storm. The bronze statues in the square still gleamed in the sun, and people still passed by, as if nothing had happened, except that when they talked about class, they no longer mentioned the Whitmores. Morning mist drifted across the Ashley River, blurring the reflections of the old oak trees lining its banks. The city was beginning to breathe again, slower, softer, as if it had finally exhaled the last of its arrogance. The scent of magnolia hung in the air, mixing with the salt from the sea breeze. One morning, I stood by the river, watching the sunlight ripple across the surface like liquid gold. Sophia walked toward me, her steps steady, her posture no longer bent under the weight of shame or grief. She carried a roll of blueprints under her arm, the corner of the paper fluttering against her white coat. The wind lifted her hair, revealing a smile that came from a place no victory could ever fake: peace. "Dad," she said softly, "I just signed a grant from the community fund." Her eyes reflected both pride and humility. "The first 12 houses will start construction next month." Behind her, a flock of pelicans flew low over the river, their wings gliding in perfect silence. I nodded slightly, my voice low, but certain. "Good. Build with bricks, but keep your soul with kindness." She smiled. "Dad, you know who I learned it from." Her words, light as a breeze, carried more warmth than any applause, and for the first time in years, I felt my chest loosen, not from triumph, but from forgiveness. In the distance, where the Whitmore mansion once rose, like a symbol of untouchable wealth, there was now only a flat lot. The marble lions were gone. A weathered sign read, "For sale," its corners curling under the sun. That house, once filled with champagne laughter and hollow toasts, now stood as empty as a trophy without meaning. Meanwhile, my small wooden house by the river still creaked in the wind, its porch uneven, its paint peeling, but inside, the sound of Sophia's laughter filled every crack in the walls. A fallen empire, a humble home reborn. Life, I realized, is sometimes poetic in its fairness. That afternoon, I visited the construction site of the new elderly home project, and Lao Home. Dust rose in the sunlight, the rhythmic clanging of hammers, the buzz of saws, and the voices of workers shouting measurements filled the air like music. The workers waved when they saw me. "Boss," one of them yelled with a grin, "they're calling you the man who brought down the upper class." I laughed, shaking my head. "No," I said, "I just rebuilt what they forgot. Respect." The men nodded, faces smeared with sweat and pride. Each brick laid was a small act of redemption for the city, for me, for everyone who'd ever been told they were less. When the project was completed, the mayor came to cut the ribbon. Reporters swarmed, microphones pointed, cameras flashing. One journalist asked, "Mr. Elias, do you have any words for those who once looked down on you?" I smiled and replied simply, "If they think money defines class, look at the hands of the bricklayer. Because it's these hands, not gold or silver, that hold this city together." The crowd fell silent. Then, an elderly woman with trembling hands stepped forward. "My son was cheated out of his pension by Whitmore," she whispered. "But you gave me back my roof and my faith. Thank you, Elias." Her hands were rough and warm, carrying decades of labor and loss. I held them, unable to speak, because no speech could honor what she had given me: truth. That evening, the air smelled of jasmine and rain. I sat on the porch, watching Sophia and Ray Ortiz, her business partner and quiet protector, discuss security systems under the golden porch light. Ray's laughter rumbled softly, and Sophia's eyes gleamed with that unspoken connection only survivors share. From the small cafe down the street, a guitar hummed a slow Spanish tune, the kind that made the night stretch just a little longer, as if afraid to end. Something beautiful. Lucia's voice echoed in my memory. "If one day you can no longer build houses, build people." I looked at Sophia, at Ray, at the neighbors who had joined the cause, and I realized I'd done both. Charleston's skyline shimmered under the moonlight. The river carried the reflection of 1,000 lights, as if the city itself was finally at peace. The houses I built still stood, not as monuments of revenge, but as proof that justice may walk slowly, yet it never forgets its way home. In a city that once worshipped wealth, one man's calloused hands had reminded everyone what true class looked like. I took the last sip of bourbon, its burn gentle this time. The horizon glowed faintly, not bright, not flashy, just honest. Tomorrow would come, bringing more work, more laughter, more life. And I'd greet it, the same way I greeted every dawn, with gratitude, not anger. The end of revenge, I thought, isn't triumph or gloating. It's when you look back and know you've lived right. It's peace, quiet, earned, and real. If it were you, after loss, humiliation, and injustice, which path would you choose to prove your worth? 1. Fight back until they understand your pain. 2. Live better and let time answer. 3. Teach the world that respect is the only thing that cannot be bought.